Hi everyone, and thanks for joining. Today we're going to be talking about marketing mix modeling projects, specifically some of the things that can go wrong, and most importantly, what you can do about it. So this is really aimed at anyone who's responsible for building or managing marketing mix modeling projects, whether that's in-house within an advertiser or within an agency or a specialist vendor. So I am joined today by a couple of colleagues who have delivered between them hundreds of marketing mix modeling projects and will share some of their insights with us today. They have very similar but subtly different job titles. So we have Roz Bowman, who's a consulting director based in our London office, and Dave Lenz, who's director of consulting services based in Chicago. And in terms of agenda, what we're going to cover today is we've organised the content into 10 top tips that we recommend following, and they're basically organised into two areas. The first is around data, so getting the data right and some best practices. And secondly, around stakeholder management, so who to involve and when in the process to make sure things run as smoothly as possible. So we'll run through those 10 tips across those two areas, and then we will summarise at the end with a Q&A section. So if you do have any questions as we run through the content, please do use the feature at the bottom of the screen for Q&A and submit your questions, and hopefully we'll be able to get through as many of those as possible at the end. So with that, I will hand over to Roz, who can get us started. Over to you, Roz.
Well, thank you, Phil. So getting the data right. Just to jump straight into this section, there is more to MMM than just data. And as Phil said, we'll touch on the people and the process management during the second half of the webinar. But we can't deny that data is fundamental to a successful MMM project. Without good data, you can't build good models, you can't create good insights. So first, we're going to review some simple watch-outs and tips for making the data stages of a modelling project run smoothly. I have the control. So our first tip, don't underestimate data complexity. What do we even mean by this? So in my mind, there are 5 points at which data can bring complexity. All of these elements on screen can bring a challenge. And this highlights actually that all stages through a project can involve some intricate data work. So another tip is not to think of data as purely a first step that goes away once it's done once. To expand on the points here on screen, a crucial step is deciding what data to get. As a model builder, our role is to hear the story of a business and translate that into data that quantify it. Seemingly simple decisions, such as what to measure as a model outcome, can expand. Will it be sales volume, sales revenue, new customers? Will this be at a total business level or split into some kind of division? How will we align value to each sale? And then figuring out what factors will help explain movements in that volume, things like price, promotions, advertising investment, competitor pressure, etc. So there's a lot of decisions in deciding what you're going to need. Next, sourcing all these data items by being in touch with people around the business, in agencies, in other industry bodies. It all needs very persistent management to ensure every item gets brought in on time and ready to utilise. Then processing that data means making a plan for how you get all of these disparate data sources into one harmonised complementary data set that you can base a model upon. It could include filtering, splitting, mapping, weighting, and all these rules for processing should be documented. To keep on that point, I mentioned documenting the process. So if for some reason a change to an outcome is required, you may well then need to change the filtering rule. So a clear route to make those amendments to the processing will be a blessing. So maintaining data can be quite a challenge. Data corrections may be provided, and keeping track of data version and updating variables can be quite challenging. I've seen multiple times in projects when a model is built based on historic data. Sometimes it's an easy fix, but once or twice the reality hits, like when a client asks a question and the need to revisit a model after the delivery and make a change to data and a variable is quite a nerve-wracking process, so try to avoid that. And finally, planning how to use data in the future can involve a systematic approach to forecasting work or handling fresh data for model updates. More on both of those elements will come later in the webinar. So a tip, after all that spiel, quite a long point, but here's a tip. Simply start off well by creating a data checklist. Collaborate with your key contacts and put together a list of everything you're going to need. Some items will be standard, seen in many models. Some will be more bespoke to that single project. Do it early in the kickoff stages, and then that kind of, you'll use those stages to shape, prioritize, and source that data list.
Yeah, and I think a data checklist is a very, it's very simple technology, but very valuable, because often you can get caught up in the optimism in a meeting where, 80% of the data might be very easy to get and familiar, but if the checklist makes you focus on the 20% that's more difficult, so you don't forget elements.
Exactly. I find it really useful as a source to keep those kind of early meetings, like as an agenda and as a status. It's a very useful list to keep you on point and make sure nothing falls through the gaps, and saves your brain power. You can just go through the list and make sure you've got everything, and it's keeps you on target.
Yeah, very much so. And I think that brings us right into the next tip. Don't accept unvetted data at face value. So in a marketing mix, we're often combining data from multiple data sources that may cross separate budgets. It's your job as the modeler to make sure the data, is accurate and complete. So, it helps to have some understanding of the data sources. Are these sources internal to the company? Is it coming from external media agencies? A little bit where it's coming from. And really the best way, to understand the data is to build the story. What does the data say? After you consolidate and combine all the data, you're going to build a story and then review it with the client. And so really kind of the best practice is to build time for it. I find that if you can summarize the data 3 ways. So one, what's the story and overall trend? So did spending increase or decrease? Did we shift dollars from TV to digital? Is it flat year over year? What would you say in English? What's the general story? And then secondly is, what are the total spends? Make sure we understand the total spends, the cost per impressions. Do those, look correct and support the story? And then thirdly, at a little more detailed level, what does the timing look like? So looking at charts over time, say at a quarterly level is usually sufficient. If you get all those together and review it with a cross-functional team, that's pretty good at catching any mistakes. And the biggest mistakes, honestly, I find are not, an actual error in the data itself. It's usually we forgot something because it's in a different budget, for instance.
Yeah, and I think, as you said, like visualizing it can make it so much easier for other people to spot, because you can literally see a color in a chart disappearing or a blank space in time when, oh, well, there should be a campaign sitting there. So let's find the person who used to run that business section and find out about that campaign. So yeah, I think visualizing can be super useful.
I agree. I agree with that. And people are good at different things. Some people like the visualization, some people like the story, some people are more focused on the total. So if you do all 3 of those, it covers a lot of bases.
Yeah.
The other thing I'd just add, Dave, is just to ask a lot of questions, because some data that you might receive is fairly self-explanatory what it is, but often you'll receive a file, maybe an export from a database that you're not familiar with, and actually making sure you properly understand what you're looking at can be quite a big task with a lot of these things that just aren't familiar. So if you're going to be using this data within a model, it's crucial on you as the model builder that you really understand the ingredients that are going in, because you will be asked about it and it is your responsibility to really understand it. But make sure you kind of front weight that work and do that early on, to ask a lot of questions, make sure you really understand what you're working with.
Agree. All right. I think we go to tip 3.
Tip three. Lovely. So on tip 3, moving away from maybe data that the clients handed you or from their databases, we're talking about external influences. So we can't forget, our tip is don't forget to account for external influences. One of my favorite ways of working on a new model in maybe a less familiar industry or something we haven't done before, we're building a fresh model. I see how much I can form of that model without any marketing data and any media data. It sounds a little bit devious, but I feel it's a really good approach to give a feel for how influential the media factors are really going to be, as opposed to how they've been planned and aligned to other external influences. So let's have a little think about what kind of external influences it may be that we need to account for. There are some universal factors that will affect human decisioning across the board, wherever industry you're working in. Some kind of more grown up and serious, like consumer confidence, inflation, interest rates, economic factors. And then there's day-to-day behaviour that could be majorly influenced by extreme weather. Think hurricanes through Florida, wildfires in Greece. Then there's simple weather deviation from average, like, a very hot week in Oxfordshire. Maybe I will go and get an extra pint in the pub. Those little happy decisions. Public holidays, of course, can create alternative habits that we should make sure we're accounting for. Who would arrange their motor insurance on Christmas Day? Whatever floats your boat, but you've got to think about those holiday times. And then there are maybe more nuanced factors that affect specific industries and businesses that could be driving sales up or down. Product demand and new releases. So here we're thinking about things like car registration plate renewals in September, March, new movie releases, price indices of luxury markets. That's all external to what the client can control, but very important in their businesses. There'll be regulations like gambling limits, junk food advertising rules. There may be tax changes like different duties introduced on alcohol. So those factors, again, going to have an impact, but can't be controlled internally from the client's point of view. And then very large scale global impacts can also filter down to affect a business. It's good to bear in mind that even if real data doesn't come into a model, the context for why other data you do have moves the way it does can be really powerful. We had an example recently where we saw really long lead times for a product in the UK, and that was depressing sales. And we learned that the conflict in Ukraine was actually having very big impacts on the product supply chains. And this context adds some real credibility during the model delivery meeting. So talk to your client to get these kind of stories, and then source a set of data to test inside your initial models. Keep the source up to date, and you can use it in other suitable projects as well. Some items will be easily and freely available, like in the UK, the ONS website is a great source for kind of macroeconomic factors. Google Trends can be a great support for desk research into industry shifts. Some of the data, maybe you might need client help to source from different industry bodies or paid for access. But have a contextual data vault, have that list of places you can go to have that data that affects an industry or affects the country as a whole, and keep it updated, because you can always dip back into it then where it's suitable on other projects.
Yeah, and I think this is very useful. It's very useful for building a good baseline model, which helps you estimate the marketing, but also this helps build the story. So it does give you a lot of credibility when you're presenting it, especially to wider teams.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so that brings us to tip 4. So tip 4 is about granularity. So have the correct granularity for the model's purpose. Too granular means an overcomplicated model. Too aggregated means no insights. The reason I bring this up is because, more data is available every day, and it seems to be, as the years move forward, data gets more and more granular. So just because we have it, though, be careful of, how granular we go. It's really your job as the modeler to balance the statistical aspects with the business questions. So, how we look at it is a well-focused model that answers the key priorities is much better than a model that tries to answer everything. Because when it tries to answer everything, there's kind of too many compromises built into the model itself. So it's a good idea to hear. This, again, is kind of understand the priorities of the team and align the granularity with the business questions. And, some additional things here to remember is, when you're setting expectations from the onset, don't say you can read every single thing. A lot of items at low levels of granularity, like one example is the client might want to break out, say, Facebook into several different campaigns. You'll probably need to test that first before you promise you can deliver that. But as long as you set up expectations first, understand the business questions, usually you can balance these.
Yeah, I think these are good points. Like our next tip will probably cover off a few of the same thoughts and ideas about really aligning to what the needs are. But I think also just on the granularity point of view and sticking with that word, you brought up some really good examples there of maybe it's granularity down to very small campaign splits or different ways of using media platforms. There's also the question of maybe like periodicity of models. Some clients maybe ask for a daily model looking at daily website traffic, things like that. So you could think about daily modeling versus weekly modeling versus monthly modeling. And again, it will come down to what the question is and what the needs are from that model as to what's suitable. And then the technical aspects of is this going to be robust and stand up with significant findings if you start splitting into different time periodicities. And there's quite a few different ways that you can dig down or roll up different elements of the model. But it's as long as it's doing what it needs to do, that's the key, isn't it? And doing it well.
Absolutely.
So I was thinking the last point we have on data, kind of maybe a little bit more of a broader thought away from specifics of data and revisiting a few of what Dave has said there about making sure there's an alignment and a thought behind what you're doing. Our last point in this data section is think before you model. I heard a quote that's always stuck with me, a bit cheesy, but I think it's quite true. Like, projects don't go wrong, they start wrong. So if you set out with an understanding of the fundamental points that you'll need to cover and stay really diligent throughout to meet them, then your project is far less likely to derail. I think it's just a truth of project management, not just MMM and modeling, but stick on the tasks that you need to get to the end. Firstly, don't rush ahead without involving the client. I think we've said this a lot in other points, but communicate. Talk with the people needed at each moment you require input. It may feel a bit like a delay, but those chats often reveal shortcuts or solve problems instantly or save you from unnecessary work. Communication isn't a pause, it can be progress. This sounds so cheesy when I say it out loud, but it is. I'm one of those people, I love to sit there and independently work on something, but actually if I let my barrier down and just have a chat with a colleague or the client, so things just, they do become easier. You do get the answer from other people. So I think communication can be really, really, really beneficial. Uncover the key business questions before modeling anything. So be clear on what you're trying to solve, and this clarity will shape your approach and ensure the model delivers meaningful insights. Plan for data integration. A bit of explanation here. So, think ahead about how your data will be used. What will you actually create model inputs with? Maybe what you can't get may limit your model explanatory power. So how will data also feed into the planning in the future? If you've got a solid integration plan to use that data, you're going to ensure your model is grounded in reality and then ready to support decision making in the future. And lastly, revisiting your goals often. I like to always put myself in the client's shoes, take a step back from like the nitty gritty of T-stats and ROIs, but ask myself, okay, if I were planning next year's strategy, what would I like to know? And does this model actually help? So to a tip, you don't need to dive into a full project straight away. Possibly a feasibility or a data discovery study can really help to uncover if a viable model can be formed, or if there's actually a plan to build for the future can be designed. Additionally, set aside a distinct time to survey the business in order to uncover what the questions you're trying to bring an answer for and where the biggest benefit may lie. On multiple occasions, we've run proof of concept projects. These have helped to figure out where in the business the most useful data can come from, test the approaches, maybe simplifying the approach and getting a better business question answer. Mini projects, or at least giving these focused tasks their due consideration, is a smart way to guide the process without getting distracted by a rabbit warren of a build.
Yeah, and I find proof of concept or feasibility study can be very useful to, say a non-standard industry or a business that just hasn't done a marketing mix before. It can be very useful to.
It just de-risks the process, right, for everybody involved. And if there's some uncertainty about is the data quality good enough, then it's a perfect way to kind of take a first step to address that question before making a bigger commitment.
Agree.
The other thing I just wanted to add to one of your points, Roz, was around the planning for data integration. Really like to think about this as creating a mental model before you go and create a statistical model. So really thinking through what are the key factors that we believe intuitively should be driving this business. How big do we expect the magnitudes of these effects to be, and are they positive, negative? Are they linear or non-linear? And by forcing yourself to go through that process before you actually get into the model build, you're almost taking a shortcut to having a model that's more likely to make good intuitive business sense later on, because you've already put a lot of thought into exactly which variables you need to construct and how to treat them as you start that modeling process.
It's a really nice way of modeling. It's kind of like proxy coding. Like if you write out what you want a script to achieve, and then you write your script to achieve it. I like that, and having that mental model by your side. So when you actually get to what you think is your finalized model, put them next to each other and check you are filling in all those gaps and you've done what you hoped. So with that revisiting goals, it's like just checking. Your past self can do you massive favors if you sit through and think what you want to achieve and then check that you did. You've helped yourself. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so I think we're moving into the second half now, kind of more thinking around how to work with people and to get that process all the way through. So Dave, this is your bag.
Yeah, so this is who should I involve in a marketing mix project and when? And the kind of quote we have is, marketing mix is not a solo sport, it's a cross-functional endeavor. So think broadly. So one thing is don't talk only to the marketing team. So certainly, you're going to have a key contact in marketing, or if you're doing this internally, you may be in, a marketing analytics function. And the marketing contact can help, and it's central to the story. But you should include a wider team, especially in these kickoff meetings, such as sales teams, retail operations, other departments. They can hold key information and have an understanding of marketing activity that may be in a different budget.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you an example. This is when I was working internally at a manufacturer. We were running a marketing mix, and we almost forgot to put in some of the retail marketing spend because this was not something the brand managers cared about because it was in a different budget. How did we get it in there? Well, it can't, literally because we invited them to the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And really the best practice here is, stakeholder mapping. So, working with your key contacts to map out a wider group, that, has an understanding of, what drives the sales and an understanding of these different budgets. And if you map those out, including the kickoff meeting, that can, help you answer lots of questions before you start.
Mm-hmm. I think there's also the element of then kind of embedding the project and having buy-in from the business, having people who support what you're doing and helping to improve it in the future as well. So not necessarily from the data sourcing or learning what you're going to need to do, but if you've got stakeholders from around the business involved through the project and giving them sight of what you're doing, it can help to then embed those findings into the business and get a bit more acceptance, because sometimes things can be quite political, what you find or what you're doing. If you need to have a holistic view of the business to build a good model and make it most useful and make it most real. But sometimes that can have some quite hard truths in it. But if you've got having those conversations with the wider business all the way through, it can make those conversations easier. I used to work client side at a retailer who relied really heavily in the past. They relied really heavily on a lot of paper products, so a lot of paper catalogs, paper flyers, and they had a huge team internally doing all of that. But as you can imagine, as time was developing and evolving and becoming more digital, that team's usage and how it affected the business was changing quite a lot, and our modelling had to account for it. But we didn't want to step on people's toes and kind of say, oh, this is disappearing and this is coming in and offend anybody. But we made sure to include that part of the company in the conversations, help them understand what we were going to be trying to say and how we could help rather than just, say anything negative towards them. But that helps just have those people on side and help with a conversation rather than scaring people at the last minute.
Yeah, I think there's a slightly different angle as well that really hit home for me. We're working with a telco, and they said we're an absolutely massive company, and there are loads of different departments who, whenever there are any improvements in the sales numbers, they're all claiming credit.
Yeah.
So maybe the marketing team think it's marketing, but the UX team think it's a UX thing. So it might be changes that have happened in the call center or tweaks to the proposition, like all kind of different factors that may have had an impact. So in terms of actually building a proper, accurate, realistic model and having good credibility with the business, you need to at least be accounting for and being aware of these things.
Absolutely. Right, tip 7. Let's keep our pace, keep momentum. Tip 7, in a similar vein about thinking about different teams to talk to, but a really key team is going to be the finance team within a business. So don't engage finance too late. So the finance team hold the purse strings. This gives them a lot of influence across the business. While not every board member is maybe going to listen to what marketing is saying, they will all listen to finance. So embedding our MMM project in the wider business can lie with having an ally in that team, or at least showing a good level of credibility in finance's eyes. Also, to your benefit, finance can add a real practical benefit. For instance, on countless occasions, the team helped to input to calculate ROIs properly by understanding like a true value of the model outcome to the business. I've also had experience where the finance team have actually got much cleaner and more structured access to data sources like media spend. So they've saved a lot of manual wrangling of media plans and been a real asset to that data stage. Finance will know which parts of the business are strategic priorities, like both in the past and in the future. So this can really help scope your model to focus on what's truly important and shape your delivery insights to show what matters and not just trivialities. They will have aims for the business, and then you can therefore ensure that the MMM gives recommendations that align with those specific aims. And they may well own forecasting for the business. We know MMM can be very close to that kind of forecasting, or it can give an alternative framing to the forecast. So it's useful to keep those two kind of similar practices together. So as for a tip, kind of repetitive of what we've said before, but involve finance early when you kick off, or at least have a named contact nominated. And then whilst you're working, ask yourself, what extra financial information could augment this or provide supportive evidence for this point, and then seek it out. Go and approach them. They're people. Like finance could be incredibly useful.
And if we actually want to make the results actionable and feed into the forecasting and budgeting process, then finance need to buy into it and buy into it early. So it's super, super important.
Yeah, and I find it useful just for a wider point of view as well, because you're, especially if you're external to the company, if you're coming in there, you're trying to learn as much as possible. And, every different department might have a slightly different point of view, and it's useful, to hear it from them without a filter.
Yeah. And in a very quantified way. Of course, they're very numbers oriented. So of all the departments, you tend to get that numbers and that evidence and that quantified point of view, which can be, of course, useful to us because we work with numbers. Sometimes it's the hardest thing to then be consistent with. You've got numbers and it can be tricky. But if you can set your numbers off against theirs and it makes sense, then you're in a very strong place to be very credible and very useful.
Right. Very natural to involve them in the project. Yeah. All right. So we will jump to the next tip. So the next tip, be sure to manage expectations with leadership. So senior leadership may or may not be in any of the meetings you set up. So you may be presenting to them personally, or you may be giving the tools to your clients to present to them. But make sure you understand and prioritize what leadership cares about. So, focus on the questions that matter most to senior stakeholders. They're not always interested in all the detail, but again, they're going to want clear, actionable insights. And just a couple things, tactically, make sure you set expectations on the timelines. You understand where this fits into the planning cycle. And clarify what the project will deliver. Don't overpromise. And then when you're delivering the project, make sure your insights are strategic. So the marketing mix, isn't just understanding the past, it's about what can we do with it, and especially what's the story. This you might have, say, a 20 slide presentation. Well, what would it look like if you converted it into one slide? With here are the results, here are the recommendations, here's the reasoning. Because at the end, that's that might be all senior leadership might see. Best practice here. So in addition to getting the story right, use a phased delivery. So make sure you have time to build the story and then use a phased delivery with your contact to take them through it and make sure it makes sense and is feasible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'll move into our last tip because there's quite a lot of kind of similar thoughts and ideas in this plan for the last mile. So as you've mentioned, that the leadership tend to come into a project and see the results at the end, but you need to make sure you've got there and you've got your contacts to help you get to that point, and you're very sure of yourself when you've got to that final delivery to the upper leadership team. But getting to the end of that project, to get to the end of a delivery, you've got to be ready and manage your own expectations of what it can be like to finalize a model and get to delivery documents and optimizations. So don't forget to plan for this last mile, as we call it. To go through the points on screen, MMM often falls short at insight to action handover. What we mean is that, defining recommendations for media channels, for instance, it can be seen as an easy last step, but it's the factor that when done well, separates an average MMM from a really standout MMM, making them truly useful for the company and really actually actionable. Optimization often comes last in the process because you require a finished model. But from the start of model conception, keep in mind that your model needs to support future decision making. It can't just explain the past. So don't design too many features to overfit the past, but that don't actually lend themselves to creating future strategy. A good model is built on solid data and thought structure, but forecasting is actually kind of a separate challenge. You need to make clear assumptions about the future. Even the best model can produce nonsense if the assumptions aren't well considered for the future. And so on that point, expectation management is crucial. Like, leadership and stakeholders need to understand what the model can and can't do. So be clear about the scope of the optimizations and the forecasting outputs. Like, an MMM model can't actually predict the future because it can't quantify the results of something that's never been witnessed before. So you need to make sure that your clients are going to understand that. Importantly, also set your own expectations on the likely pressure that you may encounter in this last push to deliver in a delivery phase. I've had experiences that, although wholly positive in the end, have been very pressured. Like, one sticks in the mind: a near all-night effort to finalise optimisation recommendations, followed by a 7 a.m. breakfast meeting with the CFO in Starbucks. It was an awful lot of pressure at that last hurdle, but a good MMM project may well be challenged with really high stake requirements, so be ready to be pushed. So how to handle the wrap-up stage? Get feedback from your key contacts, whether it's clients or other parts of the business, but get feedback from those people on the delivery material. Maybe make them accountable too for putting it together so that you really form truly relevant and useful recommendations, and always set time aside to specify what your forecasting and optimization tasks are going to be and how you'll handle them. It does take a bit of separate thought as opposed to just flowing straight on from the modeling.
Yeah, this last part can often take longer than you think. So it's definitely important to build time into it, and it's an iterative process. And you may be communicating with different groups as well, but it's very important part to really make sure your mix lives on after you leave.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because it's not always once and done, is it? As I think our last tip kind of leans into.
Yeah, so don't don't treat marketing mix as a one-off project. And this, I'll give you a couple reasons for this. So one, strategically, the best way to do marketing mix is to do a marketing mix, implement recommendations from it, remeasure it, understand what happened, and think of it as a continuous loop. So that's kind of the ultimate vision. It's embedded in the planning process. But then secondly, from a technical point of view, if you set up everything in your project, when you set up your data that flows into the model, make sure it's at least semi-automated and repeatable. It should be set up so if in the middle of the project, for example, the client says, oh, you know what, there's something wrong with the data, we have a new data set, that shouldn't derail the project. That should be more of a speed bump instead of derailing the whole project. So it should be able to handle items like that, as well as often we have done a one-off project, and then the client might say, oh, you know what, we have this new campaign coming out in a few months. We want to read that too. And again, this doesn't have to be kind of a full model rebuild or restarting the process from scratch if you have everything, kind of set up to handle that. And then again, it just makes it easier to embed this into a decision-making process going forward.
And documentation is pretty important in that, right? In the repeatability, because it's too easy to then, think this is finished and then pick it up in 6 months and struggle to remember what was the thought process behind a certain way a data input was treated or rationale for something. So actually keeping track of those things, not just what happened, but why, will save a huge amount of time for future self.
Yes, that can be critically important, the documentation and organization. I mean, I think I recall with one client's documentation went so far as we documented their SQL code that the company was using to pull some finance numbers so they could be so they could replicate them again exactly.
But that's the thing, it's not uncommon at all to, even within a project, need to go and re-request something and you don't get the same contact. You haven't the same person within a bigger company, and someone else does have to, and it can be really quite subtle changes, make big differences, and we know we like consistency to data. So I don't think that's not unheard of from my point of view either, actually having a log of how they did it on their side, and making sure you can match it up again.
Yes, very, very much so.
Very good. Well, thanks guys for a great conversation. I think we can move on to the summary now. So just to summarize very briefly, so we've talked through 2 key areas of making sure your marketing mix modeling can avoid some of the common pitfalls. So firstly around data, and secondly around stakeholder management. So on the data side, the key tips: don't underestimate the data complexity, don't accept unvetted data at face value, ask questions, chart it up. Don't forget to account for external influences and build that model based on the big dynamics before you add in the marketing and media data. Make sure you've got the correct granularity for the model's purpose, and think before you model. I think this idea of a mental model before you get started is incredibly useful. Then on the stakeholder side, I think we hammered this point pretty hard, but don't talk only to the marketing team. Finance, particularly important. Make sure you're managing expectations with all stakeholders, but especially with senior leadership. Make sure there's enough time for the last mile, and actually optimization shouldn't be an afterthought. Exactly as Roz said, the whole project ideally should be geared up for what questions are we trying to answer, what scenarios do we need to run in order to answer those business questions, and then what does our model structure need to look like to enable those scenarios. So having that kind of forward planning will make that last part that much smoother. And finally, best not to treat MMM as a one-off project. If it's not automated, at least make sure it's repeatable so you can pick it up later. So with that, we will move on to Q&A. So I think we've got a few questions have come in already. If you do have any further questions, please do use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. But we've got a few, so I will jump in and think this one looks quite nice. So question way back on tip 1, if you can remember that far back. So we talked a bit about a data checklist. Maybe this one you can start with, Roz. What information should be captured in that data checklist, and is there a kind of template? How do you think about that? You're on mute, Roz.
There we go. Sorry, my slide buttons were over the button. Yeah, I mean, super simple thoughts. Maybe it's too simple, but a data checklist should be in a nice list. So we're looking for, we really mean whether it's an Excel list or some form of a table or tickets in a system, but itemized listing for what you're going to be collecting. What is the data that you need to collect? So what is the metric that you're looking to collect, and what's the definition of that metric, a description of the item, so everyone looking is very clear what that row of the list means, who is going to be responsible for providing that information, so the person's name, the team in the departments you're looking, what periodicity is needed for the data, so is it weekly data, monthly data, what's available, and the time range it's going to need to cover. It's probably likely that's the same time range that covers your modeling for all the data, but you can either use your data list as a place where you're giving your request or you're keeping note of what's possible. So again, yeah, maybe I've overcomplicated the answer already, but you can use it for slightly different things. You're going to have your request, but you're also going to have your tracking. So I'd also say in a data list, you should have some form of tracking and status flags in there. Whether you've requested the data, you're awaiting it, it is received, you've done some first round checks. So kind of whatever is relevant to the milestones in the way your business works, you can have that tracked and that status in that sheet. You could use a data list for keeping questions about the data, links to where the data is. Again, that, you know, that's added on if you wanted the benefits of that. I think on a practical side, though, you need something, you need it centralized so that at least everybody on the modeling side can see. But if you want to be able to also centralize and allow your kind of your client or your data providers to also see that can be really useful. So it can be live, it can be maintained, and it can always be referred to in those early modeling kind of status meetings. And it is the agenda point, making sure you're tracking the progress on that data list. So it's a very long-winded answer, but it can turn out to be a very big document, and there's a lot of maintenance that goes into having a good data status and keeping it useful. But row by row,
right?
keeping detail in that.
Make it the data Bible almost. So
Yeah.
have all your definitions, detail on the exact sources, links to where it is, where it's come from.
Yeah.
And then it just gives you one central place that you can review. I think is super helpful. Cool. Sticking with data, what data do you usually find to be most problematic?
What
data isn't.
Yeah, exactly. The data I find the most problematic is usually it's usually like a smaller. Okay, so first of all, usually the digital data I find cleaner than the offline data. The data I find mostly problematic is really when the spending gets kind of small. Like if they spend $1 million, usually the data is good because people look at it so much. It's when a program is small, say, okay, this is 30,000, you know, people don't pay as much attention to it. It might be from a smaller agency. So it might come in like, you know, some non-standard format as well. So instead of being in a machine readable CSV format, it might come in, you know, I had some radio data come in 40 PDF files, for example, for one program. But I would say the smaller programs that people aren't paying attention to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, media data can quite often be not standard, depending on the agencies providing or the way things are booked and the channels booked. You can get quite non-standard, funny shaped data. So media data can quite often, bring a challenge. And aligning spend, as you said, like sometimes the offline is harder than the online, but aligning spend to the activity and making sure that's done in a representative way can be harder. I think it depends on the type of project you're running as well, like in a maybe less than standard business where you don't necessarily have a simple kind of price variable or something. Like pricing is going to usually be key to sales and promotions. And in some business, finding out how would you class the price of an item and how would you track that price of an item, that can be, I've found that have had that be very challenging in the past, to really be able to find the exact right contact in a business, figure out what a definition of pricing should be, and then figure out if you can build it into the past and into the future. That can be very difficult outside of media.
Yeah, makes sense. Interesting one for you here. We talked about finance. It's a question. Finance is often a blocker for MMM due to perceptions that marketing is an expense rather than an investment in growth. Do you have any tips for how MMM can be positioned to finance to achieve a more positive view about MMM as a technique?
I mean, one thing I find useful is, since a lot of times with finance, with marketing mix is we can, take the marketing driver down to an ROI. So at that point, you're speaking the language of finance. So I mean, I often find finance very accepting when we can talk down to the ROI level, or how can we help them with forecasting, for example. In those type of cases, it can almost be finance becomes a cheerleader for the project when you get to that level.
Yeah, because if you can be transparent and prove that it's the numbers doing the talking, and you've got a technique and approach that it's easier for us, I suppose, because we tend to be, if we're running a project, we tend to be external to a company, and so we're not necessarily trying to prove something that we've done has worked well, but we're just trying to see what the numbers say and what the model can give us. But that can be quite useful, like if you can show that the numbers are doing talking and the result is this quantified result and it's robust behind the scenes, and it doesn't necessarily say, look at this amazing job that media's done. It might actually show a small incremental gain from media, but alongside it, a much larger impact from maybe some of those external factors we were talking about, or other industry changes. That, I suppose, that credibility as well of measuring the media against other stuff and showing how it's the icing on the cake can be quite,
I mean, I think
powerful too.
From my experience, that's the crucial point, is landing the incrementality point, because I think a lot of you use the word credibility, a lot of the issue that finance can have with marketing is if you're using last click metrics where people know they're flawed and they're not incremental, or there are kind of vanity metrics that have been used in the past to measure the impact of marketing. And I think all of that, doesn't do the job that finance need it to, whereas leading with the idea that marketing mix modeling is kind of uniquely, maybe not uniquely, but capable of measuring incrementality, or at least estimating incrementality of the media investments and the true difference that they can make, then I think there's more of a level playing field with other things that finance could be investing in, and usually that can help to open that particular door.
I think also is something that comes up sometimes is, the difference between maybe marketing modeling and media modeling. If you go from whatever sources of who you listen to at marketing, you can also include in there the price, promotions, product changes. That is all also elements of marketing, and maybe to finance's eyes, they're much more those tangible decisions on pricing, on promotions and discounting. Like, if you're also proving that your modeling is measuring them and judging them in the same harshness or the same way you're judging media, that I guess brings some credibility that it's not just media channels, but all of those other really.
But also they can be bigger
points.
drivers of profit, right? So actually that can really give the needle as well. Cool. I think we've got time for one more question. So we mentioned kind of proof of concept or feasibility projects. Have you got any advice on when they're particularly applicable and what they can be used for?
I mean, I would say, I found it most useful for a client who, again, is completely new to marketing mix. And it really is, it's useful in two parts. So one, it's useful just to put the data together. Again, you're often combining data from multiple sources, different budgets. You're going to put it together. I've been in lots of meetings where, again, it's useful just to see the data, just to see the time series chart, seeing all the data integrated in one place. Just doing that is useful. But especially then, if they haven't done a marketing mix before, you can, again, it de-risk the project. You can prove that it works. Or, I guess if something happened, you would say like, oh, we didn't have all the data, there's some issue, but you know, usually almost always it does prove it works. It's just an easy way to glide into it.
Yeah, I was going to add a similar thought that for me or for us, more regularly, quite often it's data discovery work rather than pure like technical proof of concept. But things like designing a finalized structure to a model, like assessing the practicalities and the benefits of maybe doing store level modeling for a retailer. Like ultimately that, you know, it's a real example. Ultimately, we decided to move to regional aggregations because that was just closer to the dynamics they needed to measure and the planning questions they had. Or like choosing between value buckets of products or specific brand buckets. And there we kind of agreed on the brand instead because it was much closely aligned to the customer's point of view and the promotional strategies they were running. But it's all, yeah, that was all about data discovery, using the data in different ways just to prove what's practically going to work and what's going to answer the questions. But yeah, then there's the whole other side of proof of concepts of like maybe doing slightly more technical, advanced, clever statsy stuff and using different platforms and things. But I think it really depends what kind of projects you've got put in front of you and what the client is keen to do, whether you're experimenting.
Yeah, makes sense. Cool. Well, I think that's all we've got time for today, unfortunately. So thank you very much for your time and attention. We will send out a link with the recording within the next day or so. If you do have any further questions or would like to discuss any of these points in a bit more detail, then please don't hesitate to reach out. But for now, thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.